here's Brody Brazil.
Quick promo for the voicemail line. It's about as simple as it gets. You call in at 8334-BRODY with something great to say. I'll play the very best calls and respond to them here on the channel. I love the fact that calls are coming in from all over the place.
Hey, Brody. This is Trevor out of Cincinnati. With a lot of the talk around the NFL expanding in the next couple of years, whether it's, Canada or Mexico, I've heard, even into Europe.
Right.
There's always one team that I've kind of had my mind on that I thought was really interesting. Toronto's a really big city, and I really think the NFL needs to go there. What do you think are the possibilities of the NFL just bringing the Argonauts of the CFL into the NFL?
Whoa.
Obviously, there would be a talent problem there.
Right.
But I think that the Argonauts are just a really big brand, and I think that would be a good way for the NFL to get into the Toronto and the Canadian market as a whole. Thanks. Love the show. Bye.
Trevor, thank you very much for the call from Cincinnati. I don't mean to shoot this down in multiple different ways, but I've got to start with this. The NFL actually poaching a CFL team like the Argos, that is like the very last possible logistical thing that could ever happen. I think if the NFL were to ever do this, like enter the Toronto market, they would just drop their own expansion team there. Trying to take a team out of a league like the CFL and affect that and try and take over personnel and staff, and it doesn't make sense. Like, those teams are designed different ways with Canadian players and what they call import players, like United States players. The bottom line is that's not really a possibility. And Trevor, I also hate to break this news to you, but I think there's no possible way in the near future that the NFL is going to Toronto. Now, I just want to establish that to let you know where this video is headed, but I also want to take a step back and do want to talk about NFL expansion. I do believe that when the NFL grows by however many teams, I do believe that's going to happen on an international basis, whether it's Spain or Germany or England or Mexico City, as a lot of people predict. It's kind of weird that we're not really talking about a Canadian city hardly ever. But it's also weird that the NFL, of the major four pro sports leagues, is kind of the last one to really be serious about expansion, like in the NHL. In the last couple years, and even as recently as this offseason, they've talked specifically about Atlanta and maybe Houston to some degree. The NHL is going and growing, and I have no reservations that they will expand, and they'll probably do so maybe even before football does. How about basketball? We know that Las Vegas and Seattle are a literal slam dunk for the association, and that's bound to happen sooner than later. And Major League Baseball, I mean, they're the ones that maybe should be the last to be expanding, the way their whole financial situation is going, a little bit of uncertainty. But they've been talking about adding two teams, maybe one in Nashville, maybe one in Portland, maybe one in Utah, who knows? They've been talking about that for at least the last decade or so. But football has talked about expansion for quite some time. I don't want to say they haven't discussed this, but it just really feels like a back burner type situation. And maybe some of that is because they're already expanding their existing teams. 29 NFL teams are already in something called the Global Markets Program. I'll explain what that is in just a second. Maybe they think they're growing in different ways without actually expanding, but it's weird because the NFL is probably best positioned to expand and to grow globally. And I just want to go back to one thing that Commissioner Roger Goodell said recently. He thinks that the NFL's competition is not the NBA, it's not Major League Baseball. The NFL's competition is like Google and Apple. Like, he puts the NFL on that highest plateau of large corporations and entities. And so that's why I think he's believing on a global scale that that's the way NFL expansion is going to happen. It's going to happen outside North America. They're really trying to expand and grow their audience in places that it doesn't fully exist right now. So going back to Canada for a second, if the NFL were to expand, yeah, Toronto makes a ton of sense. Not the capital of Canada, but like the cultural and population hub of Canada, most certainly. There's one huge problem. Buffalo. Right around the corner, well, around the corner of Lake Ontario from Toronto. I know so many people, so many hockey players actually, who grew up in Toronto. They're huge fans of the Buffalo Bills. That's because Buffalo to Toronto, as the crow flies, is what, maybe like 30, 40, 50 miles max? If you were a bird or an airplane and you flew right over Lake Ontario, you could get from Toronto to Buffalo pretty easy. And it's only what, like a 90-minute drive around the corner of Lake Ontario there. So for two reasons. Number one, I don't know that the NFL wants to have two competing teams next to each other in that proximity. But second, if you're the Buffalo Bills, like that's cutting down on your regional fan base. People that used to go or would have gone from Toronto to Buffalo to go see the NFL, now they're just going to stay in Toronto and watch their own team. I also want to say that Toronto right now doesn't really have a football venue like maybe they once used to. The Argos, right, they recently moved to BMO Field. The Jays got to fix up, and I'll still call it Sky Dome. I'm old school like that. They fixed up Rogers Center to make it more baseball exclusive. So I don't know that there's like a good landing spot for an NFL team right now. BMO Field, it's not serviceable for the NFL. But I do think for a lot of ways and reasons, Toronto makes sense with its diversity, with its size, with its demographics. It's just that Buffalo is right there. So the Bills would never allow that. I don't think the league would ever necessarily want that. So let's kind of unfortunately scratch Toronto off the list of Canadian potential cities. So here are the other choices in terms of just population alone. Montreal. Well, Olympic Stadium is getting fixed up. Maybe the market is not as big. It's culturally a little bit different being in Quebec. Maybe that's an option. Calgary, again, no stadium there. The climate, certainly in like a December or January game. If you think Green Bay is a tough place to play outdoors, imagine playing in Calgary. Vancouver would make a lot of sense. And they do have BC Place, which is a dome stadium, which obviously hosts the CFL. So that's more of a possibility. But then we get into Seahawks territory, right? A lot of people from Vancouver, I imagine, drive down on Sundays to go watch the Seahawks play. So do they really want that competition? And Ottawa, I just don't think is big enough. Look, Ottawa's had its own scenario of CFL teams between the Rough Riders and the Red Blacks over the years. So bottom line is, I don't know that there's another great outstanding choice. Toronto makes the most sense, but Toronto's almost ineligible for this. The other thing I want to point out, if the NFL really did go into Canada, which has had the CFL for a very long time. It's a very traditional league. Its rules are different with the extra players, with the field dimensions being different, with the nature of the roster of having Canadian players and also import players, like players that are not Canadian citizens. There's a lot different and unique about the CFL. And they also play, thankfully for them, at a totally different time of the calendar year. So they don't directly compete necessarily, but would the NFL entering Canada, would that help or hurt the CFL's existence? I don't think the NFL wants to impede on the CFL, but I wonder if it would actually make it better or worse. I don't know that we understand the answer to that right here, right now. Let me take one more step back and talk again about the NFL and their global markets program. What they've basically done is allow each team to select, I want to say, multiple markets globally. And I'm trying to remember off the top of my head which teams have which markets. I don't want to misspeak here. So let's just say hypothetically that the 49ers have Berlin, have Stockholm, and have Prague. I don't know. I'm just making up 3 European cities. But those are basically 3 cities that specific team can market itself towards. And because they didn't want 10 NFL teams claiming London or claiming whatever. I'm saying claiming, not that London doesn't exist. They didn't want everybody bunching up, so they tried to spread it around and make it a little bit more diverse. So you already have NFL teams trying to reach out into these other markets, but I'm telling you, there's going to be nothing like when there's an actual NFL team in a place like Europe, in a place like Mexico City. And we can talk about logistics in a whole separate video. Yeah, it's going to be tough. Yeah, the time zone and the travel and all that stuff is going to be a brand new ball of wax for the NFL. And the first couple years, I'm sure they'll try and play it safe. It's going to be different. It's going to be difficult. But I'm just telling you from a business perspective and the decision makers of the league, they'll want this to happen. And they'll probably have to make some concessions of, maybe you get a lot of extra time off if you're the team that has to go from East Coast out to Europe to play from one week to the next. They'll try and make this as agreeable as possible with the players, but the decision makers who have the power to pull this off, I don't see how they don't expand internationally sooner than later. I just don't think there's a really good Canadian choice. Unfortunately, I would love to see that for Canada. If they want it, I would love to see it for Canadians. I just don't think there's an easy choice. I think Canada is going to kind of get passed over here for other international destinations. Let me know what you think about all this in the comments section below. Also, thumbs up while you're down there helps me, this video, this channel. I've already said that. And don't forget to subscribe. I would definitely love to see you back here next time.